This is the story of a girl named Lily who thought she'd found her perfect home. She whispered to herself, a lifelong habit of narrating her life as if it were a novel. She pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped across the threshold into the cool, still air of the apartment. Sunlight streamed through the large, single-paned windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. The floors were dark, weathered hardwood, and the high ceilings with their intricate crown molding spoke of a history that Lily found charming rather than ominous. After a year of impersonal, beige-carpeted apartments, this brownstone felt like a personality. It felt like a partner in her fresh start. She dropped her box of books labeled Fiction and Life with a grunt, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. For a moment, just a moment, the silence felt less like peace and more like a held breath. She shook her head, a cascade of her brown hair falling over her shoulder. Just the emptiness, she chided herself aloud, her voice a familiar comfort in the unfamiliar space. Okay, Lily. Kitchen first, then bedroom. The next few hours were a blur of unpacking, of deciding where her grandmother's quilt would look best, of arranging her small collection of succulents on the windowsill where they would catch the morning light. She lost herself in the simple, physical labor of arranging her life in this new space, the mere act of placing her possessions making the rooms feel more like hers. It was only as the afternoon sun began to cast long, distorted shadows across the living room that she noticed the first oddity. Her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle she'd packed carefully on top of the kitchen box, was sitting on the mantelpiece. She stared at it, puzzled. She had no memory of taking it out. She must have done it absently, her mind on autopilot while thinking about where to put the sofa. The mind played funny tricks when it was tired. A little later, carrying a heavy floor lamp into the hallway, she passed through a pocket of air so cold it raised goosebumps on her arms. She stopped, hugging herself, her skin pebbling. Weird, she thought. The landlord specifically said the heating was updated and consistent. She made a mental note to check the vents, assuming it was just a draft from the old building settling around its new occupant. Old houses had personalities, and personalities had quirks. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of violet and orange, the feeling returned. The feeling of being watched. It was a prickle at the nape of her neck, a subconscious awareness that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She was arranging a final cushion on the deep window seat when she felt it, a distinct, gentle pressure on her right shoulder. It wasn't a tap or a brush. It was more like the full, gentle weight of a hand, resting there for a brief, heart-stopping second before vanishing. She spun around, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The room was empty. Utterly, completely empty. "Hello," she called out, her voice slightly trembling, betraying her attempt at bravery. There was no answer, only the low, sudden hum of the refrigerator kicking on from the kitchen. "You're tired," she told herself firmly, placing a hand on her still-pounding chest. "You've been moving all day, you're in a new place, and your imagination is running wild. It's just the stress. It's just the old house creaking. It's the silence." But as she stood there in the growing dark, too unnerved to turn on a light, the silence once again felt like a presence, and the charming history of the brownstone felt a little less charming and a little more like a secret she wasn't meant to uncover. The peace she had felt just hours ago now felt fragile, a thin veneer over something deep and still and watchful. That night, she slept fitfully. The house was noisy, but not with the sounds of the city she was used to. It was a symphony of internal groans and cracks, of floorboards settling like old bones. Once, deep in the night, she woke with a start, convinced she heard the faint sound of breathing that was not her own. She lay perfectly still, ears straining, but heard nothing more than the frantic beating of her own heart. It took her a long time to fall back asleep, and when she did, her dreams were filled with shifting shadows and a cold that seeped into her very core. The subtle intrusions of the first week hardened into something more defined, more intentional. The misplaced mug was followed by a framed photo of her parents found face down on the rug, the glass miraculously unbroken. The cold spot in the hallway seemed to grow, a permanent chill that no amount of adjusted thermostat could fix. But it was at night that the apartment truly came alive, shedding its benign daytime skin for something predatory. It began on the 7th night. Lily had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her body aching from the final push of unpacking. She dreamed she was back in her old apartment, but the rooms were distorted, the walls breathing. Then the dream shifted. She was in her new bed, but she was awake. At least, her mind was screaming that it was awake. She could see the faint outline of her dresser in the moonlight, the shape of her robe on the door hook. But she couldn't move. A leaden paralysis had locked her limbs in place. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her, and then she felt a dot of pressure began to build on her chest, not just a weight, but a presence. It was as if an invisible person was slowly, deliberately lying down on top of her. She tried to scream, to thrash, to do anything, but her body was no longer her own. A silent, desperate battle raged between her mind and her unresponsive flesh. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps that did little to fill her burning lungs. Then came the touch. It started as a cold tracing along her collarbone. An ethereal finger, icy and precise, drawing a line from her throat to her shoulder. She felt it then slide down her arm, a languid, possessive caress that left a trail of goosebumps in its wake. It was an intimate violation, a mapping of her body by an unseen force. The touch moved over the curve of her hip, down her thigh. Tears of helplessness and terror welled in her eyes, tracing hot paths down her temples and into her hair. This was no dream. The sensation was too vivid, too real, too filled with the malicious awareness. No, please, no, her mind chanted, a useless mantra against the physical reality of the assault. The pressure on her chest increased, crushing her. She felt a coldness press against her neck, like lips, but without warmth, without life. A profound and soul-shattering dread filled her. This was not a ghostly apparition. It was a physical violation by something that was not physical. Just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The weight vanished. The cold touch disappeared. The paralysis broke. Lily gasped, a raw, sucking sound in the quiet room. She scrambled backward in her bed, pressing herself against the headboard, her entire body trembling violently. She fumbled for the lamp, her fingers clumsy with panic, and flooded the room with a harsh, yellow light. The room was empty. The bed was empty. But the feeling of those icy hands was still etched onto her skin, a phantom brand. The space next to her in the bed, where she had felt the weight settle, felt colder than the rest of the sheets. She didn't sleep again that night. She sat huddled against the headboard, knees drawn to her chest, staring into every corner of the room, waiting for the thing she couldn't see to return. The sanctuary had been breached. The house wasn't just creaky or quirky. It was hungry, and it had just had its first taste of her. The days bled into one another, each night a terrifying echo of the last. The sleep paralysis and the violating touches became a brutal routine. Lily's life began to constrict around the setting sun. She started drinking copious amounts of coffee to stay awake as long as possible, dreading the moment her head hit the pillow. Dark circles settled permanently under her eyes, which themselves had taken on a haunted, skittish quality. She jumped at the slightest sound, the buzz of her phone, a car door slamming outside. The vibrant woman who had moved in just weeks ago was being systematically eroded. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Exhausted from 3 consecutive nights of terror, she decided a hot shower might calm her frayed nerves. The bathroom was steamy, the mirror fogged over. She leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on her face, trying to shock herself into some semblance of alertness. As she straightened up, she wiped a clear circle on the misted glass, and she saw it. Behind her reflection, a tall, man-shaped silhouette stood motionless. Its form was blurred, composed of the densest shadows in the room, but its outline was unmistakably male. It had no discernible features, just a menacing shadow where a face should be, yet she could feel its gaze, a possessive, hungry stare that locked onto her reflected eyes. Her blood ran cold. Her breath hitched in her throat. This wasn't a feeling. This wasn't a pressure in the dark. This was a visual confirmation of her nightmare. Slowly, mechanically, she turned around, her heart pounding a frantic drum against her ribs. The space behind her was empty. A sob caught in her throat. She whipped her head back to the mirror. The silhouette was still there, clearer now, as if it had taken a step closer. It hadn't moved in the room, but it had moved in the reflection. It was watching her from a plane that wasn't her own. She stumbled backward, crashing into the shower curtain and slipping on the wet tiles. She scrambled out of the bathroom, not even bothering to grab a towel, and slammed the door shut, leaning against it as if to hold the thing at bay. She slid to the floor, weeping uncontrollably, the cold of the tiles seeping into her bare skin. It was real. It was all real. That night, with every light in the apartment blazing, she opened her laptop. Her hands shook so badly she could barely type. She searched for sleep paralysis entity, shadow people, invisible assault. The search results were a rabbit hole of terror, leading her to forums filled with stories that mirrored her own. And then she found the word. The one that made her stomach drop into a bottomless pit. Incubus. The word stared back from the screen, a dark, ancient confirmation of her hell. She read descriptions of male spiritual entities that sought sexual congress with sleeping women, that fed on life force and fear. They formed attachments, the website said. They fed on trauma. The assaults were not just physical, they were psychic, spiritual. They could make you feel things, make your body respond against your will to foster a deeper sense of shame and complicity. Lily slammed the laptop shut. The word echoed in her mind. Incubus. It was no longer an anonymous presence or a ghost. It had a classification. It had a purpose. And its purpose was her. The line between nightmare and reality hadn't just blurred, it had been utterly obliterated. She was a prisoner, and her jailer had a name. Armed with the dreaded knowledge of what she was facing, Lily's ordeal mutated, becoming more insidious. The entity, whom she now thought of as it, began to wage war on her mind, proving that its power extended far beyond the physical plane. The assaults in the dead of night continued, but now they were preceded by a new horror, the invasion of her dreams. They weren't normal dreams. They were vivid, hyper-realistic scenarios crafted with a cruel intimacy. In one, she was lying in a field of wildflowers, a warm sun on her face. A handsome, faceless man lay beside her, his touch gentle, his voice a soothing murmur. It felt like love, like safety. But the dream would subtly twist. His touch would become demanding. His voice would drop to the familiar, chilling whisper she was starting to hear in her waking hours. Her dream self would try to pull away, but her body, traitorously, would arch toward him, responding to a pleasure she did not want to feel. She would wake up not with a gasp of terror, but with a moan of disgust and a deep, shameful heat in her face. The feeling of violation was absolute. It wasn't just her body being used, it was her own mind, her own capacity for pleasure, being weaponized against her. The entity was making her complicit in her own defilement, blurring the lines so thoroughly that she started to question her own sanity. Had she enjoyed it? Was some part of her welcoming this? The whispers began in earnest during the day. At first, they were just on the edge of hearing, a faint susurration she could dismiss as the wind or a neighbor's TV. But they grew clearer, more personal. Mine, the voice would slither into her thoughts as she tried to work on her graphic design projects. It was a low, masculine voice, devoid of warmth, filled with a possessive certainty that made her skin crawl. "You are beautiful in your fear," it whispered one afternoon as she hurriedly ate a piece of toast, her appetite gone. The worst was when she was changing her clothes. She felt a gaze so intense it was like a physical touch, and the voice would purr, "So lovely." "All for me," she started talking back, a desperate, ragged habit. "Leave me alone," she would hiss at the empty air. "You have no right to me." The response was never immediate, but it always came. Later that night, the violation would be harsher, more punishing, as if her defiance had angered it. It was teaching her a lesson. Resistance was futile. Her body, her mind, her private moments, they were all his to observe, to comment on, to use. The psychic cobweb, though she didn't yet have a name for it, was being woven around her, thread by sticky thread, each whisper and forced sensation another filament binding her to her tormentor. She was no longer just a prisoner in her home. She was a prisoner in her own skin. The isolation was crushing her. Lily knew she couldn't live like a ghost in her own life. So, when her friend Mark texted, "Haven't seen you in ages." "Coffee?" she forced herself to type back, "Sure." It felt like a monumental act of rebellion. Sitting in the bright, noisy coffee shop, surrounded by the clatter of cups and the murmur of normal conversations, was surreal. For an hour, she almost felt human again. Mark, with his easy smile and complete ignorance of the paranormal, was a welcome anchor to the world she was rapidly losing. "You look tired, Lil. Everything okay with the new place?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "It's an adjustment," she lied, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Old house noises, you know?" When they parted on the sidewalk, Mark gave her a warm, friendly hug. "Take care of yourself, okay?" The moment his arms went around her, a wave of icy jealousy slammed into her with such force it stole her breath. It wasn't her emotion, it was an external force, a corrosive rage that poured into her, emanating from the empty space around her. The entity was with her, and it was furious. Driving home, her hands were clammy on the steering wheel. She felt a presence so dense in the passenger seat she almost expected to see the leather depress. Then she felt it. An invisible hand, cold and unmistakable, slid slowly up her thigh, under the hem of her dress. "No," she screamed, swatting at the empty air. The car swerved, horn blaring from the lane next to her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The touch retreated, but the oppressive, jealous rage remained, filling the car, making the air thick and hard to breathe. That night, the punishment was swift and brutal. The entity didn't wait for sleep. It materialized the moment she walked through her apartment door, the temperature plummeting. The assault was not the usual cold, violating ritual. It was an angry, demanding, physical takeover filled with a rage she could feel vibrating in the very air. It was a clear message: "You are mine. Your interactions, your affections belong to me." She endured it, tears of shame and anger streaming silently down her face. When it was over, She felt more broken than ever. The next morning, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "Hey, not sure what happened, but I got the worst migraine of my life right after you left. Throwing up the works. So weird. Felt like I was being watched too. Anyway, feel better." Lily's heart froze solid in her chest. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. Her curse was contagious. Her touch was poison. The entity could reach through her, could infect the people she cared about. The last tether to her old life, the possibility of human connection, had just been severed. She was utterly, completely alone. Desperation became a new, potent fuel in Lily's system. The confirmation that Silas could hurt others through her galvanized her out of her despair. She would not be the reason Mark, or anyone else, suffered. She turned to the internet, to forums beyond the terrifying definitions, and found a community of people offering solutions. The most common advice was cleansing. She drove to a metaphysical shop across town, the smell of patchouli and incense a stark contrast to the cold sterility she felt inside. She bought a bundle of white sage, a bag of sea salt, and a stub of black obsidian, the saleswoman nodding sagely as if she could see the shadow clinging to Lily's soul. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily prepared for battle. Her hands trembled as she lit the end of the sage bundle, blowing on it until it glowed and produced a thick, fragrant smoke. She moved through each room of her apartment, waving the smoke into corners, along baseboards, around windows and doors. "I cleanse this space of all negative energy," she chanted, her voice shaky but determined. "All entities that are not of love and light, you are not welcome here. You must leave." At first, nothing happened. The smoke curled peacefully in the lamplight. A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Maybe this would work. Maybe it was that simple. She finished the smudging and proceeded to the salt. She poured a continuous, thin line of it across every threshold, the front door, the bedroom door, the bathroom door. A barrier, the internet said. A barrier against evil. She was pouring the final line in front of her bedroom when the air in the apartment stilled. The gentle hum of the refrigerator ceased. The distant city sounds vanished. The silence was absolute and heavy. Then a low chuckle echoed through the room. It wasn't a sound that hit her ears. It was a vibration that resonated directly in her mind, cold and deeply amused. The sage smoke, which had been drifting lazily toward the ceiling, suddenly swirled into a violent vortex in the center of the living room. The temperature dropped so rapidly her breath plumed in front of her face. The line of salt at the front door blew apart, as if hit by a gust of wind from inside the apartment. A book flew off her shelf, then another. A vase on her coffee table lifted into the air, hung for a moment, and then shot across the room, shattering against the wall mere feet from where she stood. Lily screamed, backing away until she hit the wall. And then he manifested. It was no longer a shadow in a mirror or a pressure in the dark. Silas took form in the center of the vortex of smoke. A towering, humanoid figure composed of swirling, pitch-black darkness, like living ink. Within the shadow of its head, two pits of cold, red fire ignited, fixing her with a gaze of pure, unadulterated malice. It was more horrifying than anything her nightmares had concocted. The entity, Silas, let out a silent roar that she felt in her bones, a wave of psychic fury that made her whimper and cover her ears. It raised a clawed hand made of solidified shadow and pointed one long, accusing finger at her. Then, slowly, deliberately, it swung that finger and pointed toward her bedroom door. The command was absolute, echoing in her mind. Go. Trembling, utterly defeated, her will shattered, Lily obeyed. She stumbled into her bedroom, the entity's oppressive presence filling the entire apartment behind her. Her cleansing hadn't weakened him. It had revealed his true power. Her sanctuary was a cage, and he had just rattled the bars, reminding her who was the prisoner and who was the warden. In the cold, gray light of the morning after the failed cleansing, a strange calm settled over Lily. The frantic terror had burned itself out, leaving behind a core of hardened resolve. Silas had shown her his power, but in doing so, he had made a mistake. He had confirmed he was real and that he was tied to this place. If he was tied to it, there had to be a reason. There had to be a history. She spent the day methodically searching her apartment. She wasn't looking for ghosts. She was looking for clues. She ran her hands over the walls, looking for inconsistencies in the plaster. She tapped on floorboards, listening for a hollow sound. The entity was quiet, perhaps sated by its display of dominance, perhaps watching her with amusement. It was in the back of her bedroom closet, behind a stack of sweaters, that her fingers found a slight gap in the old wainscoting. Her heart leaped into her throat. She pried at it with her fingernails, and with a soft pop, a small, recessed panel swung inward. It was a hidden compartment, no larger than a shoebox. Inside was a rusted metal lockbox. There was no key. Driven by a desperation that overrode her respect for property, she took a hammer from her toolbox and, after several shaky blows, broke the old, corroded lock. The inside smelled of dust and decay. There was no jewelry, no money, just a single, leather-bound journal, its cover stained and cracked with age. With trembling hands, she carried it to her living room couch, the afternoon sun her only witness. She opened it. The handwriting was an elegant, looping cursive, but the ink was faded in places. October 12th, 1923, the first entry began. His name is Silas. He has moved into the flat below. The whole neighborhood is abuzz. He is so charming, with a smile that could disarm a saint. Lily read, her eyes devouring the words. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor. She wrote of Silas Thorne, a man of mysterious wealth and captivating charisma. He had swept Eleanor off her feet, but soon his true nature emerged. He was possessive, controlling, with a cruel streak. He spoke of obscure occult practices, of ancient rites to prolong life, to strengthen the spirit by feeding on the energy of others. He calls it the sustenance, Eleanor wrote, her script becoming more frantic in later entries. He says fear is the most potent flavor, but despair is a vintage that never sours. He laughs that he will never truly die, that he has learned to feed, to attach, to become a part of them. He says he weaves a cobweb on their soul. Lily's blood ran cold. A cobweb. The word resonated with a terrifying truth. He grows cold to the touch. The final, nearly illegible entry stated, his charm is a mask for the monster beneath. Last night, he forced himself on me, but it was not like a man. It was cold, a violation of my very spirit. I feel him draining me. I feel his cobweb on me, sticky and dark. I am so afraid. God help me. The journal ended there. Lily sat in stunned silence for a long time. Silas wasn't a random ghost. He was a predator who had perfected his predation, transforming it into a form of spiritual immortality. He was a parasite, and she was his latest host. He wasn't haunting her apartment, he was feeding in it. And Eleanor's journal had given her the one thing she had been missing, a name for her prison, the cobweb. Clutching Eleanor's journal like a lifeline, Lily found the number for a psychic medium who came highly recommended on a trusted paranormal website. She didn't believe in such things, not really, but she was out of options. The woman, who introduced herself as Clara, Worked out of a small, warmly lit office that smelled of lavender, Lily didn't have to say much. She simply placed the journal on the table between them. Clara, a woman with kind eyes and a serene presence, placed her hands on the worn leather and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, a frown creased her brow. "He's very strong," Clara whispered, her eyes still closed. "He's layered, like a stain. Silas." Lily's breath caught. She hadn't mentioned the name. Clara opened her eyes, her gaze filled with a deep, knowing pity. "He's not a demon in the traditional sense, my dear. He's something perhaps more insidious. He was a man, a very wicked and knowledgeable man, who found a way to circumvent death by becoming a parasite. He attaches to the life force of the living, specifically through trauma and fear. The more you fear him, the more you despair, the stronger he becomes." "The cobweb," Lily breathed. Clara nodded gravely. "Yes, that's a perfect word for it. He weaves a psychic cobweb around your spirit. It's how he feeds, how he connects to you. Every touch, every whisper, every nightmare is another strand. It's why your cleansing failed. You were trying to fight his strength, and his strength is fueled by your fear. You were pouring gasoline on a fire. So what do I do?" Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How do I get rid of him?" "You can't get rid of him in the way you think," Clara said gently. "You cannot fight him. An exorcism would only make him angrier, stronger. You have to make him irrelevant. You have to break the connection." "How?" "By severing the cobweb," Clara said, leaning forward. "It's a battle of will, not force. You must, in a moment of his greatest pressure, find a core of yourself that he cannot touch. You must reject his connection so utterly, so completely, that you starve him. You must look at him and, from the depths of your soul, refuse to be his host. You must declare your own sovereignty over your body and spirit. Your will is the only scalpel sharp enough to cut that web." It sounded impossible. How could her will stand against that? Against the crushing weight, the violating touches, the psychic whispers. "It is the only way," Clara said, as if reading her thoughts. "He feeds on your fear. So you must stop feeding him. You must offer him nothing. No fear, no anger, no despair. Only your absolute, unwavering rejection." Lily left the office feeling both terrified and, for the first time, armed with a strategy. It wasn't a weapon she could hold, but it was a power she possessed. Her will. The battle would not be in the room around her, but in the landscape of her own soul. Lily prepared for the confrontation like a soldier for a suicide mission. She knew it was coming. Silas could sense the shift in her, the newfound resolve she had gathered from Clara. He would not let it stand. The attack began at dusk. It did not start with a physical assault, but with a psychological onslaught designed to break her before the main event. She was sitting on the couch, trying to meditate, to find that core of inner strength when the whispers began. They were not single words now, but a torrent. "Foolish girl. You think you can be rid of me? I am part of you now. I have been inside you. I know the taste of your soul. You are nothing without me. You are mine." The air grew thick and cold. The lights flickered. Shadows in the room began to writhe and twist, taking on monstrous, leering shapes. She saw visions projected onto the walls, images of herself, old and withered, alone and still feeling his cold touch. She saw a vision of Mark, his eyes blank, a puppet with Silas's voice coming from his mouth. "Stop it," she cried, clamping her hands over her eyes, but the visions were in her mind. Then, the physical pressure returned, slamming into her with the force of a truck. She was pressed into the couch, the familiar paralysis locking her joints. This time, the violation was accompanied by a sensory overload, a cacophony of screams that sounded like her own, a blinding flash of light, the smell of rot and decay. He was pulling out all the stops, using every tool in his arsenal to shatter her will, to make her beg for mercy. She felt the cobweb tightening, the sticky filaments around her spirit constricting, trying to squeeze the fight out of her. Despair, her old companion, reached for her with its cold fingers. It would be so easy to give in, to let him win. The pain, the terror, the utter helplessness, it was too much. Just let go. A part of her mind, the broken part, pleaded. It's easier. She felt her resolve cracking, crumbling under the immense pressure. A sob wrenched from her throat. This was it. He was too strong. She was going to break. She was going to become his permanent vessel, a hollow shell for him to feed on for eternity. The darkness was closing in, and she was so tired of fighting. It was in that moment of absolute nadir, on the very brink of surrender, that she saw it in her mind's eye. The journal. Eleanor's words. I feel him draining me. She saw the faces of all the women who had come before her, all the lives Silas had consumed. She saw Mark's text. She would not be another victim lost to history. She would not be the reason he grew stronger. A spark ignited in the deepest part of her, a small, defiant flame that the despair had not been able to extinguish. It was not a flame of anger or fear, but of pure, unadulterated will. The descent was over. It was time to rise. The spark became a fire. Lily stopped fighting the paralysis. She stopped fighting the cold. She turned her focus inward, away from the horrific sensations, away from the whispering voice, and into that small, defiant flame of her own self. She pushed herself up from the couch. Her movements were not her own, yet they were entirely her own. It was her will moving her body, not his. She stood, facing the center of the room where the swirling darkness of Silas was coalescing, pulsing with triumphant, hungry energy. He was expecting her broken surrender. He manifested fully, the towering form of shadow and ember, more solid and terrifying than ever before. He reached for her, a clawed hand extending to once again claim what he thought was his property. Lily did not flinch. She did not beg. She stood her ground, her back straight, her head held high. She looked directly into the pits of fire that were his eyes. Her voice, when it came, did not shake. It was low, steady, and carried a finality that echoed in the suddenly still air. You have no right to me, she said, each word a hammer blow. Your hunger is not my burden. You are a parasite, and I revoke your feeding rights. She could see it now, with her inner eye, the psychic structure Clara had described. The cobweb, a glistening, intricate network of sticky, dark threads connecting his core to hers, pulsing with the energy of her stolen fear. It was horrifyingly beautiful and utterly vile. Silas's form wavered, a flicker of confusion rippling through the darkness. This was not the reaction he expected. Lily closed her eyes, pouring every ounce of her being, every memory of joy, every shred of love, every bit of pain and anger she had overcome into that single, focused command. She focused not on him, but on herself, on the integrity of her own spirit. My body is mine, she thought, and visualized the threads attached to her physical form snapping, one by one, with a sound like breaking crystal. My mind is mine, she declared, and the whispers in her head ceased as those filaments vaporized into nothing. My spirit is mine. She roared from the depths of her soul. With that final, silent proclamation, she took the scalpel of her will and made one, clean, severing cut through the primary cord, the thick, pulsing strand that connected her very essence to his. A soundless shriek of denial and agony filled the room. The towering form of Silas convulsed, the darkness unraveling, the red eyes widening in shock and then extinguishing. He clawed at the air, not at her, but at the connection that was now gone. Denied the energy that sustained him, denied the fear that was his food, his form imploded. It collapsed inward on itself, pulling all the darkness and cold out of the room with it, until there was nothing left. Not a wisp, not a shadow. The silence that remained was different. It was not a held breath. It was not a watchful stillness. It was just silence. Peaceful, normal silence. The pressure was gone. The cold was gone. The feeling of being watched had vanished. Lily stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of months of terror lift from her shoulders. She felt light. She felt clean. Slowly, she walked to the large window in her living room. The first rays of the morning sun were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. She reached out and pulled the curtains open, letting the warm, brilliant light flood into the room, bathing her face, her apartment, her new life. She was free. This has been the story of Lily and the weight of Silas. Her struggle is a terrifying reminder that the most profound violations are those against our own spirit. If you've ever felt a presence that sought to claim you, or a shadow that tried to dim your light, know that your will is the most powerful shield you have. You are not alone. Share your own story in the comments below. What unseen weight have you had to shed to become free again?